Shalom, shalom, everybody. It's your boy Shalom. What's the business? Hope everybody doing good today. We're gonna go ahead and get into the next edition of the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, the Joyce Elfers book. We on law number 32. Law 32. Play to people's fantasies. All right. Let's see if we can learn something today. Let's see if we can learn something today. The truth is often avoided because it is ugly and unpleasant. Never appeal to truth and reality unless you are prepared for the anger that comes from disenchantment. Life is so harsh and distressing that people who can manufacture romance and conjure up fantasy are like oases in the desert. Everyone flocks to them. There is a greater power in tapping into the fantasies of the masses. Observance of the law. The city-state of Venice was prosperous for so long that its citizens felt their small republic had destiny on its side. In the Middle Ages and High Renaissance, its virtual monopoly on trade to the east made it the wealthiest city in Europe. Under the beneficent republic government, Venetians enjoyed liberties that few other Italians had ever known. Yet in the 16th century, their fortunes suddenly changed. The openings in the New World transferred power to the Atlantic side of Europe, to the Spanish and the Portuguese, and later the Dutch and English. Venice could not compete economically, and its empire gradually dwindled. The final blow was a devastating loss of the prized Mediterranean possession, the island of Cyprus, captured from Venice by the Turks in 1570. Now, noble families went broke in Venice, and banks began to fold. A kind of gloom and depression settled over the citizens. They had known a glittering past, had either lived through it or heard stories about it from their elders. The closeness of the glory years was humiliating, and Venetians have believed that the goddess Fortune was only playing a joke on them, and that the old days would soon return. For the time being, though, what could they do? In 1589, rumors began to swirl around Venice of the arrival not far away of the mysterious man called Il Bragadino, a master of alchemy, a man who had won incredible wealth through his ability, and it's said, to multiply gold through the use of a secret substance. The rumor spread quickly because a few years earlier, a Venetian nobleman passed through Poland had heard a learned man prophesy that Venice would recover her past glory and power if she could find a man who understood the alchemic art of manufacturing gold. And so, as word reached Venice of the gold this Bragadino possessed, he clinked gold coins continuously in his hands, and golden objects filled his palace. Some began to dream. Through him, their city would prosper again. Members of Venice's most important noble families accordingly went together to Brescia, where Bragadino lived. They toured his palace and watched in awe as he demonstrated his gold-making abilities, taking a pinch of taking a pinch of seemingly worthless material or worthless minerals and transforming it into several ounces of gold dust. The Venetian Senate prepared to debate the idea of extending an official invitation to Bragadino to stay in Venice at the city's expense. When word suddenly reached them uh, that they were competing with the Duke of Montagu for his services, they heard of the magnificent party in Bragadino's palace for the Duke, featuring garments of golden buttons, gold watches, gold plates, and on and on. Worried that they might lose Bragadino to Montagu, the Senate voted almost unanimously to invite him to Venice, promising him the mountain of money he would need to continue living in his luxurious style, but only if he could come right away. Late that year, the mysterious Bragadino arrived in Venice with his piercing dark eyes under thick brows and the two enormous black mastiffs that accompanied him everywhere. He was forbidding and impressive. He took up residence in a sumptuous palace on the island of the Decca, with the Republic funding his banquets. But man, it just seemed crazy to me, man. Why would they have to fund your banquets if you could turn everything to gold? The Republic funding his banquets, his expensive clothes, and all his other whims. A kind of alchemy fever spread through Venice. One street corner, hawkers would sell coal, distilling apparatuses, bellows, how-to books on the subject. Everyone began to practice alchemy, everyone except Bragadino. The alchemists seemed to be in no hurry to begin manufacturing the gold that would save Venice from ruin. Strangely enough, this only increased his popularity and following. People thronged from all over Europe, even Asia, to meet this remarkable man. Months went by with gifts pouring into Bragadino from all sides. Still, he gave no sign of a miracle that the Venetians confidently expected him to produce. Eventually, the citizens began to grow impatient, wondering if he would wait forever. At first, the senators warned them not to hurry him. He was a capricious devil who needed to be cajoled, find a return on the city's ballooning investment. Bragadino had only scorn for the doubters, but he responded to them. He said, already deposited in the city's mint the mysterious substance with which he multiplied gold. He could use this substance up all at once and produce double the gold. But the more slowly the process took place, the more it would yield. If left alone for 7 years, sealed in a casket, the substance, if left alone for 7 years, sealed in a casket, the substance would multiply the gold in the mint 30 times over. Most of the senators agreed to wait to reap the gold mine Bragadino promised. Others, however, were angry. 7 more years of this man living royally at the public trough? And many of the common citizens of Venice echoed these sentiments. Finally, the alchemist's enemies demanded he produce a proof of his skills. A substantial amount of gold ensued. Interpretation. The young Cypriot Mamugna, the young Cypriot Mamugna had lived in Venice for several years before reincarnating himself as the alchemist Bragadino. He saw how gloom had settled on the city, how everyone was hoping for a redemption from some indefinite source, while other charlatans mastered everyday cons based on sleight of hand. From a distance, in fact, his aura of power would be all the more impressive. At first, Mamugna did not use vulgar demonstrations to convince people of his alchemy skills. His suspicious palace, his opulent garments, the clink of gold in his hands, all these provided a superior argument to anything rational. And these established, and oh man, what is going on with me tonight? And these established the cycle that kept him going. His obvious wealth confirmed his reputation of an alchemist, so that patrons like the Duke of Mantua gave him money, which allowed him to live in wealth, which reinforced his reputation as an alchemist, and so on. Man, DJ, come here. Only once this reputation was established, the dukes and senators were fighting over him. Did he resort to the trifling necessity of a demonstration? Are y'all still eating? Mantua gave him money, which allowed him to live in wealth, which reinforced his reputation as an alchemist, and so on. Only once this reputation was established, the dukes and senators were fighting over him. Did he resort to the trifling necessity of a demonstration? By then, however, people were easy to deceive. They wanted to believe. The Venetian senators who watched him multiply gold wanted to believe so badly that they failed to notice the glass pipe up his sleeve, for which he slipped gold dust into his pinches of minerals. Brilliant and capricious, he was an alchemist of their fantasies. And once he had created an aura like this, no one noticed his simple deceptions. Such is the powers of the fantasies that take root in us, especially in times of scarcity and decline. That's a good one. Especially. Such is the power of fantasies that take root in us, especially in times of scarcity and decline. People rarely believe that their problems arise from their own misdeeds and stupidity. Someone or something out there is to blame. The other, the world, the gods. And so salvation comes from the outside as well. Had Bragadino arrived in Venice armed with a detailed analysis of the reasons behind the city's economic decline and of the hard-nosed steps that it could take to turn things around, he would have been scorned. The reality was ugly, and the solutions too painful. Mostly the kind of hard work that the citizens' ancestors had mustered to create an empire. Fantasy, on the other hand, in this case, the romance of the alchemy was easy to understand and infinitely more palatable. To gain power, you must be a source of pleasure for those around you, and pleasure comes from playing on people's fantasies. Never promise a gradual improvement through hard work. Rather, promise the moon and the great and sudden transformation, the pot of gold. No man needs despair of gaining. No man needs despair of gaining converts. No man need despair of gaining converts to the most extravagant hypnosis, who has art enough to represent it in favorable colors. I'm tripping. No man need despair of gaining converts to the most extravagant hypnosis, who has art enough to represent it in favorable colors. David Hume, 1711 to 1776. Keys to power. Fantasy can never operate alone. It requires the backdrop of the humdrum and the mundane. The humdrum and the mundane. Mundane. M-U-N-D-A-N. M-U-N. I'm tripping. I know what the mundane is. The humdrum. That one I don't know. Humdrum. H-U-M-D-R-U-M. Humdrum. Humdrum. Uninspiring. Flat. Humdrum. Fantasy can never operate alone. It requires the backdrop of the uninspired, the flat, or the humdrum, and the mundane. It is the impressiveness of reality that allows fantasy to take root and bloom. In 16th century Venice, the reality was one of decline and loss of prestige. The corresponding fantasy described the sudden recovery of past glories through the miracle of alchemy. While the reality only got worse, the Venetians inhabited a happy dream world in which their city restored its fabulous wealth and power overnight, turning dust into gold. The person who can spin the fantasy out in an impressive reality has access to untold power. As you search for the fantasy that will take hold of the masses, then keep your eye on the banal truths that weigh heavily on us all. Never be distracted by people's glamorous portraits of themselves and their lives. Never be distracted by people's glamorous portraits of themselves and their lives. It's not like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Search and dig for what really imprisons them. Once you find that, you have the magical key that will put great power in your hands. Although times and people change, let us examine a few of the impressive realities that endure and the opportunities for power they provide. The reality. Change is slow and gradual. It requires hard work, a bit of luck, a fair amount of self-sacrifice, and a lot of patience. The reality. Change is slow and gradual. It requires hard work, a bit of luck, a fair amount of self-sacrifice, and a lot of patience. The fantasy. A sudden transformation will bring a total change in one's fortunes, bypassing work, luck, self-sacrifice, and time in one's fantastic stroke. And time in one fantastic stroke. Fantasy. A sudden transformation will bring a total change in one's fortunes, bypassing work, luck, self-sacrifice, and time in one fantastic stroke. This is, of course, the fantasy per excellence of the charlatans who prowl among us to this day, and was the key to Bragadino's success. Promise a great and total change from poor to rich, sickness to health. From poor to rich, sickness to health, misery to ecstasy. And you will have followers. How did the great 16th century German quack Leonhard Thurnieser, how did the great 16th century German quack Leonhard Thurnieser become the court physician for the elector of the Brandenburg without ever studying medicine. Instead of offering amputations, leeches, and foul-tasting purgatives, the medicaments, the medicaments of the time, Therneser offered sweet-tasting elixirs and promised instant recovery. Fashionable courtiers especially wanted his solution of drinkable gold, which cost a fortune. If some inexplicable illness assailed you, Therneser would consult a horoscope and prescribe a talisman. Who could resist such a fantasy? Health and well-being without sacrifice and pain. The reality. The social realms has had the reality. The social realm has hard set codes and boundaries. We understand these limits and know that we have to move within the same familiar circles day in and day out. The fantasy. We can enter a total new world with different codes and the promise of adventure. In early 1700s, all London was abuzz with talk of a mysterious stranger, a man named George Salmanazer. What's up? You done? All right, come on. He wants some more rice and gravy. You got to wait. In the early 1700s, all London was abuzz with talk of a mysterious stranger, a young man named George Salmanazer. He had arrived from what was the most Englishman of fantastical land, the island of Formosa, now Taiwan, off the coast of China. Oxford University engaged Salmanazer to teach the island's language. A few years later, he translated the Bible into Formosan, then wrote a book, an immediate bestseller on Formosa's history and geography. Sit back. Then wrote a book, an immediate bestseller on Formosa's history and geography. English royalty wined and dined the young man, and everywhere he went, he entertained his hosts with wondrous stories of his homeland and its bizarre customs. After Salmanazer died, however, hey, come on, you gotta sit still. His will revealed that he was in fact merely a Frenchman with a rich imagination. Everything he had said about Formosa, its alphabet, its language, its literature, its entire culture, he had invented. He had built on the English public's ignorance of the place to concoct an elaborate story that fulfilled their desire and for the exotic and strange. British culture's rigid control of people's dangerous dreams gave him the perfect opportunity to exploit their fantasy. The fantasy of the exotic, of course, can also skirt the sexual. It must not come too close, though, for the physical hinders the power of fantasy. It can be seen, grasped, and then tired of. The fate of most courtesans. A courtesan. The bodily charms, the bodily charms of the misadore. All right. To bring power, fantasy must remain to some degree unrealized, literally unreal. The dancer Mata, for instance, who rose to public prominence in Paris before World War One, had quite ordinary looks. Her power came from the fantasy she created of being strange and exotic, unknowable, and indecipherable. Indecipherable. Let's see what this is. Let's see what this word is, man. Indecipherable. 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 Uh-uh. Me. Whoa. Damn, it's not in here. The taboo. The taboo she worked with was less sex itself than the breaking of social codes. Another form of the fantasy of the exotic is simply the hope for relief from boredom. Mm-hmm. Con artists love to play on the impressiveness of the working world, its lack of adventure. Their cons might involve, say, the recovery of lost Spanish treasure, with the possible participation of an alluring Mexican senorita and a connection to the president of South America, of a South American country. Anything offering release from the humdrum. Reality. Society is fragmented and full of conflict. The fantasy. People can come together in a mystical union of souls. In the 1920s, a con man, Oscar Hartzer, made a quick fortune out of the age-old Sir Francis Drake swindle, basically promising any sucker who happened to be surnamed Drake a substantial share of the long-lost Drake treasure, to which Hansel had access. Thousands across the Midwest fell for the scam, which Hansel cleverly turned into a crusade against. The government and everyone else who was trying to keep the Drake fortune out of the rightful hands of its heirs. There developed a mystical union of the oppressed Drakes with emotional rallies and meetings. Promise such a union, and you can gain much power. You can gain much power. Promise such a union and you can gain much power, but it is a dangerous power that can easily turn against you. This is a fantasy for the demagogues that play on. Differable. Thank you, Devin. I'm tripping. The reality, death. The dead cannot be brought back. The past cannot be changed. Death. The dead cannot be brought back. The past cannot be changed. The fantasy. A sudden reversal of this intolerable fact. The fantasy. A sudden reversal of this intolerable fact. Come on, what you gonna do, my boy? This con has many variations, but requires great skill and subtlety. This con has many variations, but requires great skill and subtlety. The beauty and importance of the art of the Vermeer have long been recognized, but his paintings are small in number and are extremely rare. In the 1930s, though, leave it. Vermeers began to appear on the art market. Experts were called on to verify them and pronouncing them real. Possession of these new Vermeers would crown a collector's career. It was like the resurrection of Lazarus. In a strange way, Vermeer had been brought back to life. The past had been changed. Only later did it come out that the new Vermeers were the work of a middle-aged Dutch forger named Han van Meerderen. And he had chosen Vermeer for his scam because he understood fantasy. The paintings would seem real precisely because the public and the experts as well so desperately wanted to believe they were. Remember, the key to fantasy is distance. The distant has allure and promise, seems simple and problem-free. What you are offering then should be ungraspable. Never let it become oppressively familiar. It is the mirage of the distance, withdrawing as the sucker approaches. Never be too direct in describing the fantasy. Keep it vague. As a forger of fantasies, let your victim come close enough to see and be tempted, but keep him far away enough that he stays dreaming and desiring. Image. The moon, unattainable, always changing shape, disappearing and reappearing. We look at it, imagine, wonder, and pine, never familiar. Continuous provoker of dreams. Do not offer the obvious. Promise the moon. Authority. A lie is an allurement of fabrication that can be embellished into a fantasy. It can be clothed in the raiment of the mystic conception. Truth is cold, sober fact, not so comfortable to absorb. A lie is more palatable. The most detested person in the world is the one who always tells the truth. Green highlighter for this one. The most detested person in the world is the one who always tells the truth, who never romances. I found it far more interesting and profitable to romance than to tell the truth. Joseph Wells, aka the Yellow Kid, 1875 to 1876. The reversal. If there is power in tapping into the fantasies of the masses, there is also danger. Fantasy usually contains an element of play. The public half realizes it is being duped, but it keeps the dream alive anyway, relishing the entertainment and the temporary diversion from the everyday that you are providing. So keep it light. Never come too close to the place where you are actually expected to produce results. That place may prove extremely hazardous. After Bragadino established himself in Munich, he found that the sober-minded Bavarians had far less faith in alchemy than the temperamental Venetians. Only the Duke really believed in it, for he needed. Hold on. For only the Duke really believed in it. Mm-hmm. Sit down, DJ. Sit down if you want to sit down. And sit back. Let's sit back. Let's put your ears over there so I can see. Only the Duke believed in it, for he needed it desperately. For he needed it desperately to rescue him from the hopeless mess he was in. As Bragadino played his familiar waiting game, accepting gifts and expecting patience, the public grew angry. Money was being spent and was yielding no results. In 1592, the Bavarians demanded justice And eventually, Bragadino found himself swinging from the gallows. As before, he had promised and had not delivered. But this time, he had misjudged the forbearance of his host, and his inability to fulfill their fantasy proved fatal. One last thing. Let me see. Never make the mistake of imagining that fantasy is always fantastical. It certainly contrasts with reality, but reality itself is sometimes so theatrical and stylized that fantasy becomes a desire for simple things. The image Abraham Lincoln created of himself, for example, as a homespun country lawyer with a beard. Excuse me, hey man, I'm trying to read. I'm trying to read. The image Abraham Lincoln created for himself, for example, as a homespun country lawyer with a beard, made him a common man's president. P.T. Barnum created a successful act with Tom Thumb, a dwarf who dressed up as famous leaders of the past, such as Napoleon, and lampooned them wickedly. All right, go ahead. That almost done. And lampooned them wickedly. What does lampoon mean? I think it means clown. Another word for clown. Clown. Lampoon. Lampoon. I know I've seen the movies. They have a movie, The Lampoon or something like that. Lampoon. Lampooned. Lampoon. Man. Man. Can you say lampooned, man? Oh, good job. Lampoon. There we go. Or lampoon. A piece of satirical verse designed to ridicule someone, to attack in this way. And then P.T. Barnum, let me go back. No. P.T. Barnum created a successful act with Tom Thumb, a dwarf who dressed up as famous leaders of the past, such as Napoleon, and lampooned them wickedly, or roasted them. Nowadays, roasted them. The show delighted everyone, right up to the Queen Victoria, by appealing to the fantasy of the time, enough of the vainglorious rulers of the history. The common man knows best. Tom Thumb reversed the familiar pattern of fantasy in which the strange and unknown becomes the ideal. But the act still obeyed the law. For underlying it was the fantasy that the simple man is without problems and is happier than the powerful and the rich. But Lincoln and Tom Thumb played the commoner, but carefully maintained their distance. Excuse me. Both Lincoln and Tom Thumb played the commoner, but carefully maintained their distance. Should you play with such a fantasy, you too must carefully cultivate distance and not allow your common persona not project as, or it will not project as, or it will not project as fantasy. You know, sometimes that be killing me too. And certain words that spell like project, it's spelled project, but I think in this the way it's mentioned, it means to project it. Both Lincoln and Tom Thumb played the commoner, but carefully maintained their distance. Should you play with such a fantasy, you too must carefully cultivate distance and not allow your common persona to become too familiar, or it will not project as fantasy. All right, I see you, man. But that was Law 32. Play to people's fantasies. The truth is often avoided because it is ugly and unpleasant. Never appeal to truth and reality unless you are prepared for the anger that comes from disenchantment. Life is so harsh and distressing that people who can manufacture romance and conjure a fantasy are like oases in the desert. Everyone flocks to them. There is great power in tapping into the fantasies of the masses. That was Law 32. Hold on, man. We're going to come back next time with Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Judgment. Everyone has a weakness, a gap in the castle wall. That weakness is usually an insecurity, an uncomfortable emotion or need. It can also be a small secret pleasure. Either way, once found, it is a thumbscrew you can turn to your advantage. That sounds like it's going to be a good one right there. Law 33, discover each man's thumbscrew. All right, we're almost there. We're almost there. 32 laws down. 32 laws down, my boy. We only got a little bit more to go. Only got a little bit more to go. 32. 32. We got 16 laws to go. 16 laws to go. Let me make sure. 16 laws to go. 48, 32, 16. 16 laws to go. Yeah, 16 laws to go, and we'll be done, and we'll move on to the next book. That's the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, a Joyce Elfridge book. Man, thank everybody who stuck with me. Devin J, thank you for the help on the decipherable. And we'll keep pushing. We'll keep pushing. Till next time. Shallow out. Appreciate y'all. And oh yeah, if y'all have any other books y'all recommend, hey, feel free to comment. Feel free to comment the books, and we'll see if we get a hold of them and try to read them and keep learning stuff. And growing our minds, like my boy Devin J. And his great minds matter. But shalom, shallow out.